The heart monitor screamed a single, endless tone at 3:47 a.m. as Victoria Chen, the 34-year-old billionaire whose face graced magazine covers worldwide, was officially pronounced dead by the exhausted medical team. But what nobody knew was that a janitor named Marcus Williams had just broken every hospital rule by sneaking into her room. And what happened next would defy every law of medicine known to mankind. The nurses rushed to disconnect the machines, paperwork was being prepared for the morgue, and her estranged family had already begun fighting over her $12 billion empire, completely unaware that the impossible was about to unfold in that cold, sterile room. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, his worn work boots leaving faint marks on the pristine floor, his heart shattering into 1,000 pieces as he watched them cover her face with a white sheet. He had exactly 30 seconds before security would discover him in a restricted area, 30 seconds to say goodbye to the woman who had no idea she had saved his daughter's life 3 months ago, the woman whose charity had paid for little Emma's heart surgery when every door had slammed in his face. The stakes were impossibly clear. If he was caught, he would lose his job, the only income keeping his 6-year-old daughter fed, but how could he walk away from the angel who had given his child a second chance at life? And why, despite every monitor confirming her death, did Marcus feel an inexplicable pull telling him that Victoria Chen was not supposed to leave this world tonight? Marcus was 36 years old with calloused hands that told stories of honest labor, warm brown skin weathered by years of working double shifts, and gentle eyes that held more kindness than most wealthy men possessed in their entire fortunes. He wore the standard gray janitor uniform, slightly too large for his lean frame, with a name tag that was scratched from years of use. His daughter Emma had once told him he looked like a superhero disguised as a regular person, and tonight, without realizing it, he was about to prove her right. Victoria lay beneath the white sheet, her olive complexion now pale, her usually immaculate dark hair spread across the pillow like silk threads. Even in death, she possessed an elegance that commanded attention, high cheekbones, graceful features, and hands that had signed billion-dollar deals but had also, secretly, signed thousands of checks for strangers' medical bills. At 34, she had been the youngest female CEO to break into the Fortune 100, but loneliness had been her constant companion, hidden behind designer suits and calculated smiles. The diamond necklace she always wore, a gift from her late mother, still glimmered against her chest, the only witness to what was about to happen. The last nurse exited the room, leaving behind the clinical smell of antiseptic and the heavy silence of finality. Marcus knew he had minutes at most before someone returned to transport her body. His legs moved before his mind could catch up, carrying him to the chair beside her bed. He reached beneath the sheet and took her cold hand in his warm, rough palm. "I know you can't hear me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "But I need you to know that because of you, my Emma is alive. Because of you, I get to hear her laugh every morning. I never got to thank you, Miss Chen. I never got to tell you that you're the reason I still believe in angels." Tears rolled down his weathered cheeks as he told her everything, about Emma's diagnosis at age 4, the crushing medical bills that had forced him to sell everything including his late wife's wedding ring, the 18 rejection letters from charities and foundations. He told her about the night he had found the Chen Foundation website at 2 a.m., barely able to type through his tears, submitting an application with zero hope. He told her about the phone call 3 days later that had made him collapse to his knees in the middle of a grocery store. "Your foundation didn't just pay for the surgery," Marcus said, squeezing her lifeless hand. "You gave me back my reason for living." The hospital grew quieter as the night deepened. Marcus knew he should leave, but something kept him anchored to that chair. He thought about Emma, sleeping peacefully at her grandmother's house, her scarred chest now housing a perfectly repaired heart. He thought about his wife Sarah, who had passed away during childbirth, never getting to see their daughter's first steps, first words, first day of school. He thought about how cruel life could be, taking beautiful souls before their time. Without thinking, he began to hum, the same lullaby Sarah used to sing, the one he now sang to Emma every night. The melody filled the cold room with unexpected warmth. Marcus closed his eyes, still holding Victoria's hand, and continued humming, then softly singing the words, "When the night seems dark and long, remember you are never alone. Stars above will light your way, love will find you, come what may." His voice was imperfect, rough from years of exhaustion and grief, but it carried something no expensive treatment could manufacture, pure, unconditional love for a stranger who had become his hero. At some point, exhaustion claimed him. His head drooped onto the edge of her bed, his hand still intertwined with hers, and he fell into a sleep so deep that he didn't hear the night shift changing or the footsteps passing in the hallway. He dreamed of Sarah, smiling at him from across a sunlit meadow, telling him that sometimes miracles happen not for those who deserve them, but for those who believed in them. What Marcus couldn't see in his sleep was the impossible beginning to unfold. The machines had been disconnected, but the body beneath the sheet had not accepted its fate. A faint warmth was spreading from where their hands connected, traveling through her veins like liquid gold. Her chest rose, just barely, just once, but it rose. Dr. Rebecca Morrison had worked in the ICU for 23 years and had witnessed every medical anomaly textbooks dared to describe. She had seen patients wake from comas that should have been permanent, watched bodies reject death with stubborn defiance. But when she walked into Victoria Chen's room at 6:15 a.m. to check if the body had been transported to the morgue, she dropped her clipboard so hard it cracked against the floor. The dead woman was breathing. The dead woman's hand was being held by a sleeping janitor. And most inexplicably, the dead woman's eyes were fluttering open. Dr. Morrison would later tell reporters that what she witnessed that morning defied everything she had ever learned about medicine, but nobody would believe her explanation until the security footage emerged, showing what truly happened in those overnight hours. What she saw on that footage would change the medical community's understanding of human connection forever. The first cliffhanger revelation came when Dr. Morrison pulled the security footage, and the entire hospital administration gathered in a cramped room to witness what the cameras had captured. Throughout the night, something unexplainable had occurred. Where Marcus's hand held Victoria's, a faint pulse of color seemed to emanate, though scientists would later dismiss this as a camera glitch. More significantly, his body heat had maintained her core temperature at exactly 97.3 degrees when it should have dropped to room temperature. His heartbeat, recorded by the sensitive equipment still attached to her bed, had somehow synchronized with a rhythm that wasn't there, until it was. At 5:47 a.m., exactly 8 hours after she was pronounced dead, Victoria Chen's heart began to beat again, mirroring Marcus's rhythm beat for beat. The medical team rushed in, shoving Marcus aside, their shock transforming into frantic action. Victoria's eyes opened fully, unfocused and confused, searching the chaos until they landed on the man in the gray janitor uniform being escorted toward the door by security. "Wait," she rasped, her voice barely audible from hours of intubation. The single word stopped everyone in their tracks. "Who is he?" Dr. Morrison gently explained that he was a hospital employee who had apparently stayed in her room overnight, breaking numerous protocols. Victoria's brow furrowed. "I know him," she whispered, though she had never seen his face before in her life. "I know his voice. He was singing to me. He was the light." The medical examinations that followed were exhaustive and bewildering. Every scan showed healthy organs where there had been catastrophic failure. Her brain, which had shown no activity for 47 minutes, now functioned perfectly. The aggressive tumor that had been spreading through her body, the reason she had collapsed at a board meeting and subsequently refused treatment because doctors had given her only weeks to live, had inexplicably shrunk by 60% overnight. The lead oncologist called it impossible. The neurologist called it unprecedented. Victoria called it something else entirely, a second chance. Marcus was immediately suspended pending investigation. He sat in the hospital administrator's office, prepared to lose everything he had worked so hard to maintain for Emma's sake. The administrator, a stern woman named Patricia Wells, reviewed the footage with furrowed brows. "You understand that what you did was grounds for immediate termination," she said coldly. "Entering a patient's room after death, touching the body, falling asleep on hospital property during your shift. I understand, Marcus interrupted quietly, his hands clasped in his lap. I'll clean out my locker. I needed to thank her. That's all. I needed her soul to know, wherever it was going, that she mattered to someone. Patricia opened her mouth to respond when the door burst open. Victoria Chen stood in the doorway, wearing a hospital gown, for pole rolling beside her, surrounded by panicked nurses trying to guide her back to bed. Her dark eyes blazed with a fire that had been absent for months. This man is not to be punished, she declared, her voice gaining strength with each word. This man saved my life. The administrator stammered, Ms. Chen, with all due respect, you need to rest. You were clinically dead for nearly an hour. Whatever you experienced. I experienced everything, Victoria cut in. I was gone. I was in darkness so complete I forgot I had ever existed. And then I heard singing. A lullaby that wrapped around me like arms. A voice that told me I was not alone. That voice pulled me back. That man, she pointed at Marcus with a trembling finger, that man held my hand and refused to let me go. And I don't know why a stranger would do that for someone like me. Silence swallowed the room. Marcus stood slowly, his legs unsteady. You're not a stranger to me, Ms. Chen. Your foundation saved my daughter's life. Emma. She's 6 now, because of you. She has a lifetime ahead of her, because of your kindness. When I heard you were here, when I heard you had. He couldn't say the word. I couldn't let you leave without knowing that your life mattered. That somewhere out there, a little girl says your name in her prayers every night. Victoria's composure crumbled. Tears spilled down her pale cheeks as she absorbed his words. For years, she had run her charity foundation from a distance, signing checks without ever meeting recipients, building schools she would never visit, funding surgeries for children whose faces she had never seen. She had convinced herself it was enough, that writing checks was the same as connection, that money could replace the love she was too afraid to give or receive. But standing before this humble man whose gratitude shone brighter than any diamond, she understood what she had been missing. She understood why she had been so empty despite having everything. What's her name again? Victoria asked softly. Emma. Emma Rose Williams. Emma Rose, Victoria repeated, tasting the name like something sacred. I want to meet her. 4 days later, after extensive tests that continued to baffle the medical community, Victoria was discharged with strict instructions to rest and return for weekly monitoring. But instead of going to her penthouse apartment or her mansion upstate, she asked her driver to take her to an address in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Marcus had tried to refuse the visit, embarrassed by the small apartment he shared with Emma and his mother-in-law, Helen. But Victoria had insisted, and something in her eyes made it impossible to say no. The apartment building had peeling paint and a broken elevator, forcing them to climb 3 flights of stairs that left Victoria breathless, not from physical exertion, but from a strange anticipation she couldn't name. When Marcus opened the door, a tiny figure came running across the worn carpet, launching herself into his arms with a squeal of joy. Daddy! You're home early. Emma Rose Williams had her father's warm brown skin and her late mother's honey-colored eyes. Her dark curly hair was pulled into 2 uneven pigtails, and she wore a purple dress with mismatched socks. She was missing her 2 front teeth, which made her smile impossibly endearing. A thin scar peeked from beneath the collar of her dress, the only visible reminder of the surgery that had given her a functioning heart. Emma, baby, there's someone I want you to meet, Marcus said, setting her down gently. This is Ms. Chen. She's the lady who helped you get better. Emma's eyes widened as she looked up at the elegant woman in the designer coat standing nervously in their doorway. For a moment, she just stared. Then, without warning, she walked forward and wrapped her tiny arms around Victoria's legs. Thank you for fixing my heart, Emma said simply. Now it works really good. Listen. She grabbed Victoria's hand and pressed it against her small chest, where a strong, steady heartbeat thrummed beneath her palm. Victoria sank to her knees, overcome. She had felt her own heart stop beating just days ago. She had experienced the void of death, the absence of everything. And now, this child, this perfect, living miracle, was showing her what her money had truly bought. Not stocks or properties or influence. Life. Pure, uncontainable, beautiful life. "You're very welcome, Emma," Victoria managed to whisper. "Your heart sounds perfect." What followed was an afternoon that Victoria would remember for the rest of her extended life. She sat on a second-hand couch with springs that poked her designer clothing, eating grilled cheese sandwiches that Emma had helped make, watching cartoons she had never seen before. Helen, Marcus's mother-in-law, watched from the kitchen with suspicious eyes at first, but gradually warmed as she saw how Victoria listened to Emma's rambling stories with genuine fascination. When Emma fell asleep on Victoria's lap 2 hours later, Marcus gently carried her to bed while Helen went to rest. Victoria and Marcus sat alone in the small living room, surrounded by toys and crayon drawings and the evidence of a life lived with love instead of luxury. "Tell me about your wife," Victoria said softly. Marcus's expression flickered with old pain, but also with something like peace. "Sarah was the most beautiful person I've ever known. Not just outside, but inside. She worked as a nurse, night shifts mostly, but she always made time for the important things. We found out about Emma's heart condition when Sarah was 7 months pregnant. The doctors said, they said Sarah should terminate. That the pregnancy was too risky for her, and that Emma would need extensive surgeries just to survive." His voice trembled. "Sarah refused. She said every life deserves a chance. She said she would give Emma that chance even if it cost her own." Victoria felt tears threatening again. "And it did? Complications during delivery. Sarah knew she was dying. The last thing she said to me was, 'Don't let Emma ever feel unloved. Don't let her ever feel alone.'" Marcus wiped his eyes roughly. "I've tried every single day to keep that promise. But when Emma got sick again, when the bills piled up, when I couldn't afford the surgery, I felt like I was failing Sarah. Like I was failing both of them." "But you didn't fail," Victoria said firmly. "You found help. You reached out. Most people let pride stop them. You put your daughter first. That's not failure, Marcus. That's strength." He looked at her with those gentle eyes, and Victoria felt something shift in her chest, something that had nothing to do with her recent brush with death. "Why did you save me?" she asked suddenly. "Why did you come to my room that night? You didn't owe me anything. I signed a check. That's all I did." "That's not all you did," Marcus replied. "You gave me hope when I had none. You reminded me that there are good people in this world, people who help strangers for no reason other than it's right. When I heard you were dying, when I heard no one was with you." He paused, struggling for words. "No one should die alone. No one should leave this world thinking they didn't matter. I thought if I could just hold your hand, maybe you'd know. Maybe somehow, wherever you were, you'd know that someone cared." Victoria reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses that told stories of sacrifice, the warmth that had somehow pulled her back from the void. "I knew," she whispered. "I felt you there. Your voice was the only light in all that darkness. I followed it back." The weeks that followed transformed Victoria in ways that made tabloids question if she had been replaced by an imposter. She stepped down as CEO of Chen Industries, promoting her capable vice president while retaining board membership. She dissolved her engagement to Harrison Wells III, a merger more than a marriage, releasing a statement that simply read, "I nearly died without ever truly living. I refuse to make that mistake again." She poured herself into the foundation, no longer writing distant checks but visiting hospitals, sitting with sick children, learning their names and their stories. She established the Sarah Williams Memorial Fund specifically for families who couldn't afford critical pediatric surgeries, ensuring that no parent would ever face what Marcus had faced. She hired a team to find every family her foundation had helped over the years, organizing reunions that left her sobbing with joy. But mostly, she found herself at that small apartment in the modest neighborhood, eating grilled cheese, watching cartoons, and falling inevitably in love with a single father who owned nothing but had everything that mattered. Marcus resisted at first. The gap between their worlds seemed insurmountable, and he worried that any relationship would be seen as opportunistic. "People will say I'm using you," he told her one evening as they walked through a public park while Emma fed ducks nearby. "They'll say I planned this somehow. They'll hurt Emma with their gossip." Victoria stopped walking and turned to face him. She wore simple jeans and a sweater now, her transformation complete. "I spent 34 years caring what people said about me. I built an empire on other people's opinions. And when I died, Marcus, when I actually died, none of those opinions came with me into the darkness. The only thing that mattered was whether anyone would miss me. Whether my life had meant anything beyond spreadsheets and stock prices." She took both his hands in hers. "I was given a miracle. I was given a second chance. And I refuse to waste it being afraid of what strangers might think. What do you want?" Marcus asked quietly. "I want this," she said, gesturing to Emma, to the ducks, to the ordinary beauty of an autumn afternoon. "I want grilled cheese sandwiches and cartoon marathons and bedtime stories. I want to wake up next to someone who held my hand in the darkness and refused to let go. I want to spend whatever time I have left actually living." She paused, vulnerable in a way she had never allowed herself to be. "I want you, Marcus. If you'll have me." He answered by kissing her, gentle and deep, while Emma looked up from the ducks and squealed with delight. But their happiness faced its second major crisis exactly 2 months later, threatening to tear apart everything they had built. Victoria's medical results came back with devastating news: the tumor had begun growing again. Whatever miracle had occurred that night had apparently been temporary. She had perhaps 6 months left, possibly less. She sat in Dr. Morrison's office, numb as the words washed over her. She thought about Emma, who had started calling her Tori and asking when she would visit next. She thought about Marcus, who had finally let down his walls and allowed himself to love again. She thought about the cruelty of fate, giving her a taste of happiness only to snatch it away. What Victoria didn't know was that Marcus had been visiting her medical team in secret, asking questions, researching experimental treatments, refusing to accept the verdict. And what neither of them knew was that Emma, little Emma with her perfect, fixed heart, had been praying every night with a child's fierce faith, asking God to help the nice lady who made her daddy smile again. The answer to that prayer was about to arrive in the most unexpected form possible. Dr. Chen, no relation to Victoria, was a controversial figure in oncological research, a man whose methods had been dismissed by mainstream medicine as too emotional to be scientific. He worked from a small clinic in rural Oregon, treating patients whom traditional medicine had abandoned. His philosophy was simple but revolutionary. He believed that human connection was a biological force as powerful as any drug, that love and presence could trigger healing mechanisms science hadn't yet discovered. When he saw Victoria Chen's medical records, particularly the documentation of her impossible recovery after Marcus had spent the night holding her hand, he flew across the country to meet with them. "What happened to you wasn't random," Dr. Chen explained as they sat in Victoria's penthouse, now cluttered with Emma's toys. "The human body is capable of extraordinary things when it experiences genuine connection. Studies have shown that simple touch can lower cortisol, boost immune function, and even alter gene expression. But what you experienced goes beyond that. The sustained physical contact, the emotional resonance of Mr. Williams' gratitude, the frequencies of his voice as he sang, all of these factors combined created an environment where your body's healing mechanisms were amplified exponentially." "But it didn't last," Victoria said bitterly. "The tumor is growing again. Because you went back to isolation, Dr. Chen replied gently. After your recovery, you spent weeks undergoing tests alone, meeting with lawyers alone, restructuring your company alone. The environment that healed you requires consistent maintenance. You need connection not as a one-time miracle, but as a lifestyle. Marcus leaned forward. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that Ms. Chen move in with you. That she be surrounded by love, by family, by consistent human presence. I'm suggesting that the cure for her cancer might not be found in a laboratory, but in your living room. It was unconventional. It was unscientific by traditional standards. It was also Victoria's best chance. She moved into the modest apartment the following week, leaving behind her penthouse, her staff, her solitary existence. The tabloids went wild with speculation, but none of their theories came close to the truth, that a billionaire was fighting cancer by sleeping on a second-hand couch, eating meals cooked by a 6-year-old's helping hands, and falling asleep each night in the arms of a janitor who had once cleaned hospital floors. The months that followed were not easy. Victoria had good days where she felt almost normal, playing with Emma, cooking alongside Helen, stealing kisses with Marcus when they thought no one was looking. She had bad days where pain consumed her, where she retreated into fear, where she questioned whether love could really compete with mutating cells. On those days, Emma would climb into bed with her and tell elaborate stories about princesses who fought dragons with hugs instead of swords. On those days, Marcus would hold her through the long nights, singing the lullaby that had first brought her back from death. "Why do you stay?" Victoria asked him one night, weakened by a particularly brutal round of natural therapy. "You could find someone healthy. Someone who won't leave Emma without a mother figure again." Marcus pulled her closer, his chin resting on her head. "When Sarah was dying, she made me promise to never let Emma feel unloved or alone. But she made me promise something else too, something I never told anyone." He took a breath. "She made me promise to live. To really live, not just exist. To open my heart again when the right person came along." She somehow knew, Victoria. She knew that love wasn't a finite resource I needed to ration. She knew that giving love to you wouldn't take anything away from her memory. "She sounds extraordinary." She was. And so are you. Two extraordinary women who chose to love me. I'm the luckiest man alive, and I refuse to let fear make me waste this gift. The miracle came gradually, not in a single dramatic moment but in a series of small impossibilities. At Victoria's 3-month scan, the tumor had stopped growing. At 6 months, it had shrunk by 30%. At 1 year, 1 full year after she had been pronounced dead, the scans showed no trace of cancer at all. Dr. Chen research team documented everything, publishing papers that would eventually spark an entire new field of study into the healing power of human connection. But the true miracle, Victoria realized, wasn't her physical survival. It was everything else. It was Emma calling her Mom Torai for the first time, a designation that made both Victoria and Helen cry happy tears. It was Marcus proposing with a ring that cost $37, far more precious than any diamond she had ever owned. It was Helen becoming the mother Victoria had lost too young, teaching her recipes and sharing wisdom and accepting her as family without reservation. The wedding was held in the small apartment building's rooftop garden, transformed by fairy lights and folding chairs into something magical. Victoria wore a simple white dress she had found at a thrift store. Marcus wore a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit. Emma served as flower girl, ring bearer, and impromptu wedding singer, delivering a rendition of "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star" that left no eye dry. The guest list included hospital janitors and billionaire philanthropists, children Victoria had helped and doctors who had witnessed her impossible recovery. It was a collision of worlds that somehow created a perfect harmony. When the officiant asked if there were any objections, Emma raised her hand. "I have a question," she announced loudly. Everyone laughed, and the officiant kindly asked what her question was. "Does this mean Tori will live with us forever and ever?" Victoria knelt down to eye level with the little girl who had stolen her heart. Yes, baby. Forever and ever. I promise. 3 years after she was pronounced dead, Victoria Chen, now Victoria Williams, stood before a gathering of medical professionals, researchers, and journalists to announce the opening of the Chen-Williams Center for Connected Healing. The facility would offer terminal patients an alternative approach, surrounding them with loved ones, providing therapeutic touch, and treating emotional wellness as equally important to physical treatment. Marcus stood beside her, Emma between them, now 9 years old and already declaring she wanted to be a heart doctor who gives really good hugs. I was dead, Victoria told the audience. Not figuratively. Not metaphorically. I was clinically, medically, officially dead. Every machine confirmed it. Every doctor accepted it. My family was already fighting over my money. She paused as knowing laughter rippled through the crowd. But one man refused to accept it. One man who owed me nothing, who had every reason to protect his job instead of sneaking into a dead woman's room, chose love over logic. He held my hand and sang me back to life. She looked at Marcus, her eyes shining. The world will tell you that medicine is purely mechanical. That bodies are machines that either function or fail. That emotions are irrelevant to healing. But I'm standing here today because a janitor loved a stranger enough to break the rules. I'm standing here because a 6-year-old's prayers had more power than any surgery. I'm standing here because my mother-in-law's chicken soup did more for my recovery than any clinical trial. The audience laughed and cried simultaneously. We are not machines, Victoria continued. We are connection. We are love. We are the hands we hold and the songs we sing and the prayers we whisper in the dark. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough to bring the dead back to life. The center opened to extraordinary success, with patients traveling from around the world to experience its unconventional approach. Research data eventually proved what Victoria had experienced. Patients with strong support systems showed dramatically better outcomes across virtually every condition. Touch therapy became mainstream. Family involvement in treatment was prioritized. The medical establishment slowly, grudgingly accepted that perhaps there were forces beyond their microscopes. But for Victoria, the greatest success wasn't the research or the recognition. It was the ordinary moments, braiding Emma's hair for school, arguing with Marcus about whose turn it was to do dishes, holiday dinners with Helen presiding like a benevolent queen. It was waking up each morning genuinely surprised and grateful to be alive. It was falling asleep each night in the arms of the man whose love had literally saved her life. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Marcus surprised her with a return to the hospital where they had first connected. The administration had created a small memorial in the room where Victoria had been pronounced dead, commemorating the miraculous events that had occurred there. Standing in that room, Victoria could still feel the echo of darkness, the void she had briefly inhabited. I was so alone, she whispered. In that darkness, I was completely alone. And then I heard you. Marcus wrapped his arms around her from behind. You'll never be alone again. I promise. Emma, now 11, burst into the room wearing her future doctor t-shirt. Mom. Dad. Grandma says if we don't leave now, we'll miss our dinner reservation. Victoria laughed, the sound filling the room where she had once held silence. Heaven forbid we keep Grandma waiting. As they walked out of the hospital together, the billionaire who had learned that money couldn't buy what mattered most, the janitor whose love had accomplished what medicine couldn't, and the little girl whose fixed heart had started beating for all of them, Victoria understood the truth that her death had taught her. Life wasn't measured in years or dollars or achievements. It was measured in connections. In hands held through darkness. In lullabies sung to strangers. In the courage to love even when logic screamed otherwise. She had been given a second chance not because she deserved it, but because one man had believed she was worth fighting for. And every day of her new life, she tried to be worthy of that belief. If this story touched your heart, if you felt something stir inside you as you witnessed what love can accomplish against impossible odds, then please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Stories like these remind us what we're capable of when we choose connection over isolation, love over fear, faith over surrender. Share this with someone who needs to hear that miracles still happen, because they do, every single day, to ordinary people who dare to believe. And remember, the next person whose hand you hold might just be fighting a battle you know nothing about. Your presence might be the very miracle they've been praying for.